Hi, I'm David Deanne, Pastures Officer for the Hunter Local Land Services. I'm here on Tokau Dairy with the agronomist from Taree, Peter Beale. We're here to talk about autumn winter nitrogen management on Kikuyu and Ryegrass pastures. Would you be able to elaborate on that question, please, Peter?
Yeah, look, it's it's something that we looked at quite a bit of detail a few years back at James Neal's place. There's a couple of issues. One is that moisture is usually available for good growth from February through to May, June, July. And that's a key period when we want to keep pastures growing at their optimal rate. If there's a deficiency of nitrogen in that period, we can really lose quite a lot. Against that, there's a sort of a myth that if we apply nitrogen at sowing, or too much nitrogen at sowing, or we apply it to the Kikuyu beforehand, that the Kikuyu will smother the ryegrass as it's developing at a seedling. Now, that is possible if the management's not there, but what we have found, firstly, is that there's a wide range of fertilities that we're managing out there. And what we're really targeting in this information is we're saying there are a number of situations where the fertility is low and you really should be applying nitrogen at sowing so that you're not running into a deficient situation through that establishment period. And the other, there's a number of factors that can lead to that low fertility, and to be able to recognise them and anticipate them. And we can do that fairly well.
Okay, so what are some of those factors, Peter?
Well, one of the main things is that, particularly on dryland pastures, we're not putting nitrogen on over the summer. And when we model it over a long period of time, we find nitrogen levels in that top 5 centimetres increase over the winter when we're putting it on ryegrass like we have here. But then because we're not putting it on over summer, gradually that nitrogen levels drop away because we're taking it away. So that's one that we looked at closely. The other one is that you can get an east coast low or a real wet period that just takes the nitrogen out of that soil and you're sowing into a deficient situation. Or you've just had a period where there's been very little nitrogen go on those pastures for some time. And sometimes all of those three happen together. We looked at this fact, okay, is it because we haven't put nitrogen on over summer that we're getting low fertility? And yet the model says we do it. And in our trial work, we set up a design where we put nothing, 30 kilograms of nitrogen every month and 60 kilograms of nitrogen every month. So that worked out roughly nothing, 150 or 300 kilograms of nitrogen for the Kikuyu season.
Right.
Now, it was a dryland paddock. And after what we did on top of that is at sowing, we put nothing, 30 kilograms of nitrogen and 60 kilograms of nitrogen. And we looked at the responses. We did this over 3 years at the Neal's Dairy at Oxley Island. And the results we found were really quite interesting and quite contrary to what we thought. So firstly, when we looked at the soil, after applying the nitrogen over the summer and taking away the extra dry matter, we looked at the nitrogen levels before sowing, and we found that in the first 2 years there really was an increase in nitrogen because we'd applying it over summer. So that made a lot of sense to what we thought, except in the year 2017 where we had an east coast low, we had a lot of waterlogging and it took away that extra nitrogen, which again, that added up to what we thought. So, but then when we put the 30 and 60 on those 3 different fertility levels, in each level, even though we'd been applying nitrogen before, we got significant responses, between 500 and 1,000 kilograms of extra dry matter from that application. Now that's quite significant in the scheme of things. If we're only grazing and getting 7 to 8 tonne to the hectare of harvested pasture, and we put another tonne to the hectare on, that makes a significant difference.
Definitely.
And certainly, James has experienced times where you've gone into pastures and he initiated this work where they just haven't responded the way we thought. And there are paddocks out there that are quite low in fertility. And what we want to do is be able to anticipate that and put extra nitrogen on if we think we're heading in that direction.
So Peter, what was the effect on plant establishment?
Well, again, we found that there was actually beneficial effects by applying nitrogen at sowing on plant establishment. And you can see this in these 2 photos, that one that had nitrogen applied to the Kikuyu and at sowing, the response, the number of plants established was exactly the same as the no nitrogen, but after that second cup, they came back with a lot more vigour and produced more in that next cup. So it really just says that if we manage grazing and if there's enough adequate moisture, that can really provide a profitable response and not affect establishment.
So Peter, how do we know when we should be applying extra nitrogen?
Well, there are very clear things that we can be looking at. Firstly, have we applied nitrogen over summer? Most times we haven't. Has there been a waterlogging period prior to sowing that might have drained the nitrogen? An East Coast low, that's another factor. But the other obvious one is to look at urine stains. Where urine stains are very dominant in the Kikuyu before sowing, that's giving us a pretty good indication that situation is quite responsive to nitrogen. So they vary a lot in just how deficient it is, but they're the main things to look at.
Are there any caveats to this?
Yeah, there always is in any management thing. Obviously, we can get dry conditions around sowing, yep. And you're not going to get the same response if things go dry. And in my analysis, probably 30% of the Aprils we get are actually quite dry. So in that situation, you won't get significant responses to nitrogen applied at sowing, but it can still be worthwhile applying it as those plants establish and you know you've got good soil moisture. The other really important thing is that you have to have grazing management under control. We can't let the Kikuyu get away and smother out the ryegrass. So you have to be able to get on just as you're getting into canopy cover, take that Kikuyu down and let the light into the ryegrass. If you can do that confidently, then in those low fertility situations, you can be putting on an additional 30 to 50 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare and still be okay.
So that will depend a lot on your moisture content.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And we can look at our soil probes before and after as a good guide. There's one at Sam Nicholson's, there's one out at Cranback and over at Gloucester, down at Bulladila at the Smiths Farm. It's a good idea to just keep an eye on those over that period and just see what's happening with soil moisture, what's happening with rainfall. And if those things lining up, then make the most of that period, and that can really have a significant impact on that autumn-winter feed gap and get the ryegrass going better. Of course, the other factor in that too is sow on time, and get that ryegrass in early. That makes a big difference too.
Great, Peter. Thanks very much.